Alright, all you glorious gamers out there, welcome to the PlayerStoo Podcast, the video game podcast for gamers like you, by gamers like you. You can find PlayerStoo on all the social media, that is Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, the lot. You can also find our written content over at PlayersToo.com, that's PlayerStoo.com. And if you could take 5 seconds to give us 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, that really helps us out. It does a huge amount for the exposure of the show. And while you're over there, if you could leave us a little review as well, again, that just helps us out even more. And thank you so much to anyone that's already done that for us. You're an absolute legend to us. Alright, and on with the show. My name is Mark Henderson. With me, as always, Mr. Lewis Camley. How's it going, Lewis?
It's going okay, Mark. Yeah, how are you getting on?
Not bad at all. I have to say, I'm just going to jump straight into this, Lewis. I have had a very, very busy week, unfortunately, which means that I have played absolutely hee-haw this week, which has been very disappointing. I spoke last week about the fact that I was intentionally taking a break, basically, just to sort of reset myself. I feel as though gaming has been quite heavy on me this year. Thanks a lot to Elden Ring for that. But just in general, I feel as though I've maybe lost a wee bit of enthusiasm, and I was playing a little bit through obligation when I was playing Triangle Strategy there in particular. Just wanted to reset. Now I've done totally the opposite thing. I've had an unintentional break where I was like, I really want to be playing some video games right now, and I couldn't do it. So I'm doing entirely the opposite thing, Liz. So unfortunately, very little to report on my end, but I can assure everyone here, I will have played something of significance by next week.
Well, yeah, we'll look forward to that. I mean, sometimes these things just happen, and it's not always the worst thing to end up getting even a mistaken 2 week kind of lull in your gaming, but I am sure you'll be back at it like the bad habit.
Life
it
gets
is.
In the way sometimes, Liz. Yeah. Life gets in the way sometimes, Liz. But what have you been playing?
Well, I've been playing a bit more Nier Automata, but to be honest, I'm pretty similar. I've not played a lot this week. I was away all weekend on a kind of mini holiday thing for a couple of days, so the actual time I've had to play games has been pretty limited. I did take my Steam Deck away with me, and I had all the intentions of playing a bit of maybe of Inscryption or various other things that are on the deck, but I didn't play any of it at all. It just turned out not to be that kind of holiday at all. I was getting huge day-long walks and then too tired to function in the evening. So yeah, I played a wee bit more Nier Automata in the last couple of days, which has been really great so far, to be honest. I haven't progressed it enough to really make any further comment beyond what I was saying last week, but I kind of want to impress on you just now, like how kind of fun and weird and daft I'm finding it so far. Like, and
it's great.
They're all meant as compliments. Yeah, it's just like, I think the first week that I was playing it, I said it has real kind of character to it and a real kind of sense of style. And at the time, there was elements of it that were kind of reminding me of things like Metal Gear Solid, the older Metal Gear Solid games like 1 through 3. Yes. And I'm still getting that. Like, and there's something even just in the kind of occasional changes of perspective that you get. So you'll be running through an area and you'll say, have to go up a ladder and onto this other section, and suddenly everything will flatten and you'll be playing on a sort of 2D plane rather than the 3D plane that you're normally playing in, and then you'll have this big long corridor to go down. That just, all of that just has this kind of, I don't know, just like an older vibe about it. Like, it feels like an older game than it is, and again, that might sound like a criticism, but I think it's like stylistically deliberate to be like that, and it kind of conjures up some of these like really fantastic games from when we were a bit younger. In terms of where I'm at in it just now, again, like the direction the story's going in, I mean, I don't really know where the actual nuts and bolts of the story's going, but it seems to be very clearly.
Don't worry about that just now, man.
But it seems to be a bit of a kind of a question about AI sentience and, you know, what is reality, what is life, what does it mean to be alive, all that kind of stuff is coming through very clearly at the moment. I've just reaching the end of a point where, you know, you've encountered a bunch of robots and they're living in a very different way from the ones that you've been fighting at the start of the game, and you can see all the potential avenues for this story to go down. But as I say, so far it's actually just been kind of goofy and fun and weird. There's a lot of strange goings on and odd characters and some fantastic boss fights so far. Like I think I said before as well, that the combat I was kind of expecting to be really impressed by just based on things that people had said, and I wasn't necessarily feeling that thus far. Not that it's bad either, by the way, but just like it's pretty spammy. It feels like to me you hold R1 to shoot constantly and you hit square every so often when you are close enough to swing your sword. But I've had a couple of really kind of, again, quite strange boss fights. One with a big sort of breaking down robot opera singer who seems to want to hack you at the same time with these kind of weird hacking mini games. Like, was not really sure what to take from all of that, but really enjoyed the experience of it. So yeah, I'm saying all that, like, still got miles to go, still got multiple playthroughs to go through, obviously, because of the nature of the game. But for anyone who, again, a bit like me, has sort of seen the praise that this game's got, but has maybe been hesitating a wee bit, so far so good is what I would say. Quite a lot to enjoy about it.
Nice one, man. Well, I am very, very happy to hear that, because I was a little bit worried that this just would not vibe with you. And to be honest with you, I could see why it wouldn't vibe with a lot of people. Do you know what I mean? I don't think that it's necessarily for everyone, particularly because to get the most out of it, I cannot stress this enough, you need to basically play it. How many times did I say? 4 times? Is that right?
I feel like it gets more every time we talk about it.
I think it's 4. I think it's 4.
There's like 5 main endings, and there's sort of...
I think it's up to the E ending. But
yeah.
I think C and D, you only do one of them, basically. So it's A and B, C or D, then E. I think that's how it works. So yeah, I think you have to basically play through it 4 times to get the reward at the end. And I really think the reward at the end is great, and I really thought that time was worth it for me, but I'll be interested to see if you think that when that time comes for you. But I'm glad that you're enjoying it in the short term, because if you weren't enjoying it in the short term, then it would have been a long road. This is a long road.
I'm not dreading replaying what I've played so far, which is a good point to be at.
That is a very, very good point indeed. All right, Liz, on that note, I think it is time for the news. Alright, loose news item number 1. The UK Competition and Markets Authority has recommended that the Xbox and Activision deal is sent for an in-depth investigation amid competition concerns. Now, we did talk about this a little bit last week when rumours of this decision started to surface. This next bit is going to be a lot of loose reading, I'm going to admit. And quite frankly, I would rather do that than have me paraphrase quite a lot of stuff, because there is quite a lot to this story, if I'm honest. And I would also rather everyone just heard what is, and quite possibly more importantly, isn't being said by all parties involved here. So, here is what was said regarding the deal and why it's going for a more in-depth investigation.
Following our Phase 1 investigation, we are concerned that Microsoft could use its control over popular games like Call of Duty and World of Warcraft post-merger to harm rivals, including recent and future rivals in multi-game subscription services and cloud gaming. If our current concerns are not addressed, we plan to explore this deal in an in-depth Phase 2 investigation to reach a decision that works in the interests of UK gamers and businesses.
The CMA have said that Microsoft and Activision now have until September the 8th to address these concerns, which will actually be the day after this podcast comes out. So, ladies and gentlemen, you might very well know how this all panned out, and we do not at this current moment. Unfortunately, we're running a day behind for various dumb reasons that include my busy week. However, if their proposals are not suitable, then it will be going to this Phase 2 investigation, which is basically going to be an independent panel who will evaluate the deal and see if it substantially lessens competition. The CMA also expressed their concerns in the summary of their Phase 1 reports, but I think the most interesting part of that is that they specifically name Sony as being the primary party harmed in the deal, which isn't untrue, but it's just sort of insane that they have specifically said that in their report, I think. This is what they said.
The CMA is concerned that having full control over this powerful catalogue, especially in light of Microsoft's already strong position in gaming consoles with Xbox, operating systems with Windows, and cloud infrastructure with Azure, could result in Microsoft harming consumers by impairing Sony's, Microsoft's closest gaming rival, ability to compete. The CMA believes that in the short to medium term, the main rival that could be affected by this conduct would be Sony. Evidence suggests that Microsoft and Sony compete closely with each other in terms of content, target audience, and console technology. PlayStation currently has a larger share of the console gaming market than Xbox, but the CMA considers that Call of Duty is sufficiently important that losing access to it, or losing access on competitive terms, could significantly impact Sony's revenues and user base. This impact is likely to be felt especially at the launch of the next generation of consoles, where gamers make fresh decisions about which console to buy. The CMA believes that the merger could, therefore, significantly weaken Microsoft's closest rival to the detriment of overall competition in console gaming. As the market for multi-game subscription gaming services grows, Microsoft could use its control over Activision Blizzard's content to foreclose rivals, including recent and future entrants into gaming, as well as more established players such as Sony.
Obviously, Xbox have responded to this with Phil Spencer making this statement reiterating that Call of Duty will remain on PlayStation and also confirming that Activision Blizzard games will be coming to Game Pass, although I don't think that was ever really in doubt. Lewis, once again, this from The Verge.
We intend to make Activision Blizzard's much-loved library of games, including Overwatch, Diablo and Call of Duty, available in Game Pass, and to grow those gaming communities. By delivering even more value to players, we hope to continue growing Game Pass, extending its appeal to mobile phones and any connected device. We are committed to making the same version of Call of Duty available on PlayStation on the same day the game launches elsewhere. And then, in a statement to The Verge, Phil Spencer said, "In January, we provided a signed agreement to Sony to guarantee Call of Duty on PlayStation, with feature and content parity for at least several more years beyond the current Sony contract, an offer that goes well beyond typical gaming industry agreements."
I would point out immediately here, Lewis, that several more years after the current PlayStation contract for Call of Duty is not indefinitely. And this is actually where my notes end on this particular news item, Lewis. However, just as we were about to start recording, Jim Ryan has come out with a response to Phil Spencer's response to the CMA. It's all getting very complicated, Lewis, but this is now what Jim Ryan, CEO of PlayStation, has said.
Yeah, this is in a comment to gamesindustry.biz. Jim Ryan said, "I hadn't intended to comment on what I understood to be a private business discussion, but I feel the need to set the record straight because Phil Spencer brought this into the public forum. Microsoft has only offered for Call of Duty to remain on PlayStation for 3 years after the current agreement between Activision and Sony ends. After almost 20 years of Call of Duty on PlayStation, their proposal was inadequate on many levels and failed to take account of the impact on our gamers. We want to guarantee PlayStation gamers continue to have the highest quality Call of Duty experience, and Microsoft's proposal undermines this principle."
Lewis, what the hell is going on? I cannot believe how that this is panning out the way that it's panning out. It's all got very public. I have to say, in the past, comments that Phil Spencer makes, which seem very open to us as consumers, I often wondered how executives and business people viewed his openness with certain things, and it seems like Jim Ryan was not too pleased about him discussing publicly what the situation was with Call of Duty. Do you know what I mean? Very, very strange here. Not really sure what to make of it. Not sure what's going to happen. This is the first time I've ever felt like, oh, maybe we do have something to worry about here a little bit with the Xbox and Activision deal, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I still think in my heart of hearts it's all going to go through and this will all be a bit of a
I think it is all going to go through, but the question is what's going to happen with Call of Duty? Well, that is the ultimate question.
I mean, to jump into the CMA side of things first before we get onto this kind of crazy bickering between Phil and Jim. Yeah, this is...
They sound like your uncles, don't they?
Yeah, it's all about sort of too drunk at the Christmas dinner, isn't it? Yeah, like I think that I think it's good in a sense. It is good what the regulation body is doing here. Like, they are looking at this deal.
Of course it is.
You know, we have been vocal throughout not just this deal, but plenty of other deals in the gaming industry that consolidation is bad and these big mergers are problematic, so they should be scrutinised. And I think that one of the most salient points here, because obviously there's built into this suggestion that this deal will hurt PlayStation, there's the counterpoint. Well, of course, like, that's business. Like, Xbox is trying to gain a competitive advantage, and they're not going to be punished for that part of it, really. But it's like, to what extent is it going to hurt the competitors? Is it going to be debilitating? And I think that the point that the CMA has made here about, like, this really comes into play when the next generation of consoles becomes so telling with what we have now learned through this spat between Phil and Jim, because 3 years after the current deal ends is probably still within or just coming to the end of this current console generation, right? Like, even if they extended that a wee bit, even if this generation lasts, 7 or 9 years again, that deal is going to come to an end within this period. And you've got to think, well, that's probably smart business from Xbox in terms of they'll probably, I would imagine, they will give PlayStation an ultimatum, basically, which is you can keep having Call of Duty with something else in exchange, most likely by offering Game Pass on your platform or something like that. Or they'll just pull it away and, and PlayStation will be severely hurt going into the next generation. Although all of that does still hinge on Call of Duty maintaining its its credentials as the
dominance.
Yeah, which, you know, there's some stories coming down the line later, which, you know, Xbox don't necessarily handle big IP the best all the time. So, you know, I don't really have massive doubts there that Call of Duty will still in the next 5 years be that dominant.
I mean, they've done it for 20 years, mate. I don't really think there's anything to think that they'll go downhill that drastically in the next 3. Do you know what I mean?
Okay, but, you know, again, we'll come on to other stuff later, but they have franchises of their own which they are completely missing with, that shouldn't be missing, right? So, yeah, we'll address that later. But the point here being, it doesn't feel like a gamble for Xbox to make this, but it is now being pulled up as particularly problematic. And then, yeah, the public side of this, I mean, we've been saying over the last few weeks how bitchy this has been getting. I never thought we'd get to this point where these two would be trading barbs in public. No. Phil Spencer, I think, has done a typical Phil Spencer thing where he's put out what is like quite a friendly, jolly, we're trying to make it available for everyone everywhere on PlayStation 2. No one has to worry.
The PR wizard
that's what he does. And I think Jim Ryan has just kind of called him on his bullshit here and been like, well, you want everyone to think that you're being generous and offering this. It's only 3 years. Let's make everyone aware that it's only 3 years is what's being discussed here. That's not this kind of long term, we want gamers to be able to access everything, blah blah blah. Like, it is not really that at all.
Yeah, because I thought this discussion was going to be how long do we actually think Call of Duty is going to remain on PlayStation, but Jim Ryan's just told us it's going to be 3 years, and what happens after that. And I think you're totally right. I think that will very likely coincide with a new console generation or very close to it, and when that console launches, one of them is not going to have the biggest FPS on it for the past 20 years. Do you know what I mean? And that is a huge deal. It just does, you know?
Yeah, it totally is. It will impact Sony's income, there's no doubt about it. I mean, I don't think that it's like totally catastrophic, but then I'm just not a COD player, so it doesn't have the same impact to me as it will do for other people.
I think to the casual gamer that is enormous.
Sure.
Really is huge.
And I guess if you said to me like one of them won't have FIFA, I would be going, God, that does seem like a really big problematic thing because so many people base their decisions on that. I'm just wondering, you know, if this was happening 15 years ago, I think it would be a more significant thing than it is right now, but that's not to say that it's not significant still, you know what I mean? Like,
arguably Call of Duty's bigger now than it ever has been, you know what I mean? It's like in terms of money generated, like between the mobile thing, between Warzone and between the traditional series.
Sure, but only some of that is on PlayStation as well, but you know, as things stand. But in terms of its like cultural cachet though, like in 2008, 9, whatever, like it was the thing, and it's not really anymore. Like the games come out, they kind of get panned, but it very much is like FIFA.
Everyone plays them anyway.
Yeah, it's like FIFA that every year it comes out, it gets a 7 out of 10. It sells them $100 million. You know what I mean? That's how it goes. And so I don't know, like. Sure, it will hurt PlayStation. There's no two ways about it, and PlayStation are obviously going to fight this as much as they can. I think it will still all go through, but it's getting messy, and they're showing us behind the curtain, which I never really thought that we were going to get to see.
No, they are.
You know?
They very much are, yeah. I mean, I suppose the question is really not whether or not this will hurt PlayStation, because obviously it will hurt PlayStation. It was basically designed to hurt PlayStation. As you said, it was there to give Xbox a competitive advantage. However, the question is, does it hurt PlayStation so much that they are creating an unfair advantage in the video game space? I suppose that's really the question, and I think that is a much more difficult question to answer.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, Liz, and speaking of acquisitions, there have been even more this week and some major investments as well. Firstly, PlayStation and Tencent now have acquired 30% of From Software. 10% will own 16.25% and Sony will own 14.09%. Kadokawa will continue to have the majority share, owning 69.99%. Then, and I think on the same day that was announced, it was also announced that NetEase would be acquiring Quantic Dream for an undisclosed sum. Quantic Dream's CEO David Cage has said this regarding the acquisition.
Today marks an important milestone for our studio after a quarter century of complete independence. NetEase Games values our creative freedom and the drive and passion of our uniquely diverse team. We will now be able to accelerate the vision we share as a group of creating landmark titles that touch people on an emotional level. We have highly differentiated games in the making, and I truly believe that the best is yet to come from Quantic Dream. I'm particularly proud that our employees, who were offered a significant share of our capital over the past years, will fully benefit from this acquisition. It is a testimony to our continued commitment to reward all those who have made Quantic Dream the successful studio it is today.
Well, if you've put up with David Cage and Quantic Dream, you might have got a wee payout there, so good for those people.
Yeah.
And finally, Tencent, who have had a busy week, have also bought a gigantic stake in Ubisoft. They are set to acquire 49.9% economic stake with a 9.99% capital/voting rights stake. I have no idea what the fuck that means, Lewis, but they were bought for the sum of 300 million euros, so I reckon quite a lot. Lewis, as you rightly said, we have spoken about industry consolidation for a long, long time now. At what point do we really have to start getting worried? Because it's always PlayStation, Xbox, Tencent, NetEase as well, definitely. At what point do we have to become actually quite worried about this? Because everyone being owned by the same few people isn't a very stable industry at all.
It's not, no, it definitely isn't. I mean, I think the time to be worried is now. It's just, to what extent our alarm should take hold. I partly say that because, ultimately these are companies and these are video games and there's more important things in the world, but we're entering quite a, maybe the most scary financial period of our lives, potentially. And so if there's a risk here of several big companies owning everything and then possibly hitting the rocks, that is a pretty scary thing. I mean, I don't really think
that is the scary thing, right? Yeah. Like, if everything's all only owned by a handful of things, only one of them has to give up the ghost and it's catastrophic, you know?
Yeah, for a lot of people's jobs, never mind the games, because obviously that's where everyone's mind goes to, but it's people's jobs, it's people's livelihoods ultimately that are potentially at risk here. I mean, that happens anyway with consolidations. Studios get bought up and half the staff get laid off because you don't need those people because you've got people already in house that do those things, particularly with the kind of background services like publishing and marketing and that kind of thing, where you've got your team, you don't need their team, so you can let them go even though you keep their development staff or whatever. So there's a lot to all this. I mean, some of these things I think are basically fine. Companies investing in other companies, that happens all the time. Buying big stakes in companies, that's business strategy. It's not really that alarming. Some of them were things to watch. A 49% stake in Ubisoft is something to be mindful of. Definitely.
Yes, that certainly fucking is.
A smaller company like Quantic Dream getting a big investment or getting kind of bought over or whatever.
They were acquired. Acquired by.
It's ultimately it's not that troubling because like that studio could flop it. One bad game could have sunk Quantic Dream anyway. You know what I mean? But it's just all part of a direction where everything is going, as you were saying, to these like 3, 4, 5 companies.
Yeah, in isolation, none of these things are bad.
No, as a totality,
the cumulative, acquisition market as just now is just frightening. Do you know what I mean? It's just more and more stuff is, and even in the situation with From Software, and no, I don't think the next From Software game is going to be a PlayStation exclusive for anyone worried about that. It's still more and more and more of something being owned by the same set of people.
Totally,
you know what I mean? It's still concerning to me anyway. And I just think that the more that this happens, the more unstable the industry is. Yeah,
even without that sense of like collapse, because no one's suggesting that Sony are about to collapse having put loads of money into FromSoft and then that'll tear FromSoft down, right? Like no one's really saying that's going to happen, but the more that it's that at the top of the table in all of these developing studios and in these publishing houses and that kind of thing, that if the top of the table is always the same people, then the same ideas float, right? And you don't necessarily get the kind of diversity, the experimentation or whatever. You get what that company's spreadsheets say will work best, right? Or what fits their catalogue best, not necessarily what's kind of the most interesting thing or what people want to do. So
yeah, I mean creatively, that's a great point as well. Like it stymies the industry that way as well.
Yeah, and it can just lead to all sorts of, look at even the way like Toys for Bob under Activision just got moved off doing Crash Bandicoot, which they were good at and which was popular, which sold well, seemingly well enough. But
well enough.
But they had a behemoth to service, and there's every chance that 10 years from now, Xbox and PlayStation both have a behemoth that they need servicing, and all of these smaller studios get pulled into the orbit of it, and that's just kind of boring. Apart from anything else, it doesn't need the catastrophe angle for this also to be kind of shitty.
Yeah, definitely. No, I agree with that 100%. Alright, Lewis, news item number 3. Matt Booty, head of Xbox Game Studios, has said some things at PAX West. Firstly, and I think most interestingly for us here, is his views on single studio AAA games. He said this during a Q&A answer session.
How we make games is evolving. The idea of a single team under one roof really doesn't happen that often anymore. I'll use an example. Our Perfect Dark team down in Santa Monica, the Initiative. So we just did this big partnership with Crystal Dynamics, and I read online, oh, this must mean there's a problem or something. It's quite the opposite, right? You've got this veteran team at Crystal Dynamics, a big AAA team with over 100 people that becomes available. Of course we want to work with them, particularly if they've made a game like that before. And that's how we've done an awful lot of work. If you think about Age of Empires 4, which just launched last fall, that was made in partnership with Relic Studios up in Vancouver. A great partnership. And even something like Flight Simulator, we worked with a studio in France called Asobo. And that kind of co-development, when you're working out with people like Certain Affinity, Iron Galaxy, Blackbird Interactive, all those studios are so key to the products that we make. That, though, also adds some complexity, where if one of those studios has problems, it then impacts the schedule. So the days are gone when you can sort of go, everybody, round up the team in the cafeteria, I want to tell everybody to work harder this Wednesday. That's long gone. It's gotten a lot more complicated than that.
He also made some pretty fucking concerning comments regarding his wishes that all QA testing could be done in the cloud by AI, which very much just seems like another way to fuck over QA testers who just seem to be the whipping boys of the video games industry, Lewis. Yeah. But with regards to the AAA Studios thing, to be honest with you, what he's saying about the Initiative is completely disingenuous as far as I'm concerned. I hope that most people listening to this know that games are very rarely, in every aspect, delivered by a single studio. Like most AAA games, if you go and look at the credits, you will see that multiple studios have worked on that AAA game. Is completely normal. He's right there, I have to say. However, to conflate that with the situation at the Initiative is, as I said, completely disingenuous in my opinion, because Crystal Dynamics are not a support studio. They are a AAA studio in their own right. And so far as I'm aware, that sort of collaboration between two enormous AAA studios doesn't happen. Like, you don't get Insomniac working with Remedy on the next big AAA game. That's never going to happen. It never happens. And as well, I don't think that if this was a collaboration between the Initiative, which is a new Xbox studio, and 343 or the Coalition, probably no one's even batting an eyelid about this, Lewis. But to go outside of the Xbox ecosystem is just such a strange thing. And we have to remember the context in which this happened as well, because a huge number of senior development staff left the Initiative, and in fact, VGC said that as much as half of the core team known to be working on the Perfect Dark reboot have quit in less than a year. There have also been numerous reports of frustration over the studio's direction generally, and around the slow pace of the project's development. So I think that single studio AAA games are actually completely normal, and for him to suggest that because of this very specific situation that is happening at one of his studios, that is somehow the new normal all of a sudden is completely asinine, frankly. Lewis, what are your thoughts here? Because I don't know what the fuck he's talking about.
Yeah.
It's such a highly specific situation. And he's trying to defend the Initiative's situation against nothing. Like, no one was asking him. Do you know what I mean? It's so bizarre.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously just been rumblings that this project's in trouble a bit, and that's what they're responding to. It probably doesn't help that Crystal Dynamics have been sold in the middle of all this as well. But that is another kicker, yeah. Complexity that he's talking about then. I mean, yeah, I was kind of reading that in a slightly sort of tongue-in-cheek way there, because it starts off like, oh, I'll give you an example. This one specific example that comes from my company.
Specific. It's such a very specific example.
Is at the core of the whole fucking conversation. So yeah, I think he's talking nonsense. Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think it feels very much like an attempt to kind of defend the situation, or pour cold water on rumours that there's trouble there when there clearly is trouble there. There's no two ways about it. There's trouble in that project. It's been delayed. Half of the Initiative staff have buggered off. Like, it's not in a great state, and he just didn't need to be talking about this. But yeah, like you say, it's just not true that this is the norm, unless, sure, you could then say all AAA development is multi-studio, as you were just explaining, right? It is, but it's not in the way that he's outlining there. That's not what he's saying, No.
I mean, it's like, for example, right, so in Death Stranding, we know for a fact that Guerrilla were heavily involved in that, and it was their engine that was used and whatever to help out Kojima Productions, which at the time was a new studio. Yeah. That's all totally fine and pretty normal. But see if that were the other way around. Like, see in the next Horizon game, if PlayStation had seconded in Kojima Productions to help on the new Horizon game, that's fucking weird. That's not normal.
It'd be mega.
I mean, it's a totally strange situation. It would be awesome, but it would be
the
very
thing
odd.
is that, well, that's the thing here as well. Like this situation is interesting and could be really positive. I don't think that we're all necessarily saying two AAA studios teaming up is a bad thing, but we're all going, no, that's unusual though, so what is going on? He
could spin this, Lewis. He could spin this by saying, we're doing something groundbreaking here. We're bringing two AAA studios together to make this great new thing. Do you know what I mean? We've gone outside of our own studio ecosystem to even do that. We're bringing in Crystal Dynamics for all X, Y, and Z reasons, and they will help uplift our new studio and bring them to new heights and blah, 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 blah. And it could be that. Instead, he's just lying about how this is working. It's not the situation. Oh, bizarre. All right, Lewis, news item number 4. Glen Schofield, CEO of Striking Distance Studios, who are currently making the Callisto Protocol, a game I dare say we are both pretty excited about, Lewis, has got himself in all sorts of hot water by basically bragging about his studio crunching to finish the game. He tweeted this, Lewis.
I only talk about the game during an event. We're working 6 to 7 days a week. Nobody's forcing us. Exhaustion, tired, COVID, but we're working. Bugs, glitches, performance fixes, one last pass-through audio, 12 to 15 hour days. This is gaming. Hard work. Lunch, dinner, working. You do it because you love it.
Oh,
yeah, even
it's hard to hear. It's
reading that out loud, I'm like, how absurd is this? Good lord.
So, obviously that wasn't good. And many people, like Jason Schreier, who is very anti-crunch and very vocal about that, pointed out, like, obviously no one is physically forcing you to be there. But at the same time, if your company has a culture where people feel like they have to crunch, you have a problem there. He also pointed out that it's not great that the guy who controls the salaries, the titles, and the employment status of many of these people crunching has also publicly said that that is what he values. It's really, really, really not good, which subsequently led to this apology tweet list.
Yeah, so Glen Schofield later tweeted, like, what was it, about a day later, anyone who knows me knows how passionate I am about the people I work with. Earlier, I tweeted how proud I was of the effort and hours the team was putting in. That was wrong. We value passion and creativity, not long hours. I'm sorry to the team for coming across like this.
And while Jason Schreier was the loudest about this, as he usually is, and got all the backlash that comes along with that, I actually think that Matt Piscatella said it best with his tweet, which read, "Crunch isn't something to be proud of. If not planned, it represents a failure somewhere in the timeline. If planned, it represents cruelty. In any case, it is not good." And I think that is quite beautifully put. I really think that this is a shame because I don't think that Glen Schofield is a bad guy in any capacity. But this attitude is just like perfectly emblematic of a generation of video game designers that he was part of that just has to go. Do you know what I mean? Like, I genuinely hope that he's not just like pandering to the Twitter mob here and has like actually learned a lesson and actually in his next project will be thinking about like, how do I not crunch on this, you know? I don't know, maybe that's a generous reading of the situation, Lewis, but yeah, I can't help but hope that he has genuinely learned from this, you know?
Yeah, you gotta hope he's learned from it. Oh man, how do we just keep on getting to these positions though? Who is letting these company heads tweet this nonsense out? And
yeah, CEOs shouldn't be allowed Twitter. And I'm pretty convinced of that now.
How can they not see how bad that sounds? I mean, I do accept that, you know, and I do think we're maybe slightly guilty here of giving him a bit of a benefit of the doubt because he has come across well in other forums, but like, you've got to look at that and hope that what he was saying was kind of like, we love it, that we'll put everything into it. But what it reads as is the opposite. It reads like, in order to work at my studio, you have to fucking kill yourself for this video game. And like, you know, again, if this game now launches with any sorts of issues at launch or gets delayed right before launch, this tweet is going to haunt him and that studio. Like, on my immediate reading of it, it immediately dampened my enthusiasm for the Callisto Protocol, which does look like a fantastic game, and I am still excited to play it because I do think the team shouldn't be punished for what this guy thinks about it all. But, you know, you can't help but be like, he's been the figurehead, the focal point, the public mouth on this game repeatedly, to the point where we were making jokes about it during Gamescom.
Gamescom.
Yeah, so he's always there, and so to come out with something like this, just like fucking hell, like come on, you know that this is bullshit. You can't say that.
Yeah, I know. Well, more to the point, I do hope that he realises this is bullshit and that this isn't gaming. That's not what gaming should be. Do you know what I mean? And game development has to change from that attitude very, very quickly. And a lot more studios are putting in the effort to make sure that that happens. And I just hope that he is now going to be one of them. Alright, Lewis, finishing off as we always do with a couple of shout-outs. Shout-out number 1, The Last of Us Part 1 has come out this week, currently sitting with a very good 89 on Metacritic, but notably less than the 95 the original PS3 game got. All the negative comments are exactly the narrative you've probably been hearing about on Twitter for months now. E.g. that the game is now £70. There is no multiplayer factions mode, and the gameplay hasn't been updated to The Last of Us Part 2 levels. However, in my opinion anyway, this remake is almost certainly going to be the best way to play one of the best games ever made, in my opinion. Is the price going to be worth it to you? I think that only each individual person can answer that, really. Like, if you already own the game, is £70 to play this remake worth it to you? Like, maybe not. But if you've never played the game, this is the version of the game I would recommend playing every single time, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a pretty sensible conclusion to it all. Like, this debate will rage on. The Last of Us just can't help but generate headlines and division. But yeah, like you say, if you've never played this before, go out and play it. It's phenomenal. If you have played it before, consider whether you really need to play it again right now and pay that money for it. Yeah,
I think that's fair. Alright, Lewis, shout out number 2. The reviews for Splatoon 3 are now in as well. It is currently sitting with a pretty nice 84 on Metacritic. Most criticism seems to be around the fact that there's nothing really all that new about the game versus the other two, but at the same time, this is an accumulation of the previous two games with minor but not groundbreaking improvements throughout, basically. In reality, this game is going to live or die by how many people play it and how many people stick with it. And if the other two games are anything to go by, and I believe Nintendo are supporting this for free with content for at least 2 years, I believe, I think that this game is going to have a healthy community behind it for a long, long time.
Yeah, great stuff here. More of the same from Splatoon. That's all the fans are really going to be wanting. It's kind of landed where I thought it might, and yeah, I hope people will enjoy it, basically.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, if it's taken up by the masses, it'll be great. If it's not, then Nintendo have got an issue. Alright, shout out number 3. CDPR have announced the DLC for Cyberpunk, which is coming next year. However, it looks like this will be the first and last expansion for Cyberpunk. Interestingly, it is only coming out on the current gen consoles and PC. They have said that the scope of the expansion would make it, quote unquote, technologically challenging on previous gen consoles without, quotes, compromising player experiences. Something they should definitely have thought about for the original release of the game, Lewis.
I can't believe they've said that out loud. Amazing.
The DLC, which is called Phantom Liberty, appears to be a spy thriller and is set in a new district of Night City, which I actually think is a pretty cool idea, but I just don't know how many people are going to be drawn back to the game for this DLC. I certainly won't be.
Yeah, here we go again. I mean, it depends what the scope of this is, really. Like, if this is a big, substantial update that could...
It sounds like a big chunky bit of DLC.
Yeah, it does sound like it, yeah. And if that could be the kind of thing that does draw a lot of people back, because if they can kind of frame this as, like, this is Cyberpunk 2.0, like, the game's fixed, here's a new chunk of content, all the base game is better now, come and play it. Like, that could work, but I think you're probably right that if it's just like another sort of mission sequence and it's pretty good, that's not going to be enough to draw most people back.
No, it's not. And also, I don't think that they're doing what you're saying deliberately, because I think they want to move on from this. They're doing one DLC probably out of obligation. I believe that they were originally supposed to be doing 2. Multiplayer has not been mentioned in a very, very long time. Yeah. And I think that is definitely dead. I think they want to move on from this list. Alright, shout out number 4. More bad news for Halo Infinite fans, unfortunately. The co-op campaign, the Forge beta and Season 3 have all been delayed. The couch co-op has been scrapped altogether, sadly. I actually seen an interesting tweet, which I couldn't find, but if I can find it, I'll put it in the show notes. Basically comparing the current state of Halo and the current state of Cyberpunk. Halo obviously came out, and it had a pretty positive launch. Like, I think people were pretty optimistic about it sort of long term as well. And it has just turned into a huge series of letdowns for that fan base again and again and again. Like, I really feel for them, I really do, because I think there was a lot of optimism around the game when it released. And Cyberpunk, having arguably the worst launch in video game history, seems to be actually satisfying its fan base now, with a lot of people seem to be excited about this new DLC. The game is not the juggernaut game that we were all promised, Liz, but it seems to be doing fine now, basically. Like, I don't think that one of them is necessarily better than the other. It's just an interesting talking point, but I really think that all enthusiasm for Halo Infinite has long gone now. It really has.
It definitely has, yeah. It's leached away from it big time. I mean, it did come out with a bit of a splash and people were quite excited, and it felt like people were saying then, you know, it's back, and it's really not worked at all. Like this
there was a huge amount of buzz about it when it came out, and it's just fallen flat in its face again and again and again and again since then. It really has. It's so sad to see. It really is.
That's it, yeah. Delayed features, delayed maps, delayed content. Now this, I mean, scrapping couch co-op, which was something that I think has been promised for a long time, and I think even previously a former head of the Halo project or whatever had kind of said, like, this will always be part of it because it had been cut from a previous game or whatever. You know, there's quite a lot here that is pretty disappointing, I think, for 343 Industries and Xbox overall, and hopefully Halo sees some changes in future, because it's really stumbled.
Going back to what Phil Spencer said about this game, that it would be a launch title for the Series X, is becoming more and more laughable as the days go on, because this game still isn't ready for prime time as far as I'm concerned, man. It's just all over the place. Every bit of news that we get from Halo these days is just so negative, and it's genuinely hard to see, because that should be the Xbox flagship franchise, you know what I mean? And it's just floundering badly right now, which is very sad. All right, and on that absolute bummer loose, time for a beer, and then we'll be back for Topic of the Week. And we are back for Topic of the Week. Topic of the Week this week is the future of Assassin's Creed, Lewis.
It is indeed, yeah, Mark. This week we're talking about Assassin's Creed because on Saturday, the day after this podcast comes out, we're getting the next Ubisoft Forward event. Kind of at long last, really. Ubisoft went a bit quiet through the summer in terms of their kind of showcases and stuff. They didn't show up at too many of the sort of season of game showcases. But this Saturday, we're getting Assassin's Creed news big time by all accounts.
Sounds like it, yeah.
Yeah, so we've had kind of confirmation after a kind of series of leaks recently that Assassin's Creed Mirage, previously codenamed Rift, is coming. It seems to be coming in spring 2023, and will be a kind of smaller game than the last few games have been, and moving back towards its kind of stealth action roots, and moving away a wee bit and stripping out some of the RPG elements. We'll come back to that a wee bit, but this is the one that you might have heard of. It's going to be set in Iraq or in Baghdad, and in kind of like the year 800. It does feature a character who was in Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and yeah, it's got some interesting stuff going on there in terms of its retreat back to what Assassin's Creed used to be. Feels a little bit like Ubisoft might be trying to create a sort of an Assassin's Creed for everyone. No matter what kind of thing you like, we've got the Assassin's Creed for you. But the other thing that we're kind of expecting here, and this has come particularly from a report that Jason Schreier put out, basically saying the rumours are true. We are going to get information at this event about not only a mobile game as well, actually, which I don't think we know anything really about, but finally some news on this Assassin's Creed Infinity project, which has been long rumoured and talked about. So this, if you're not aware, is this kind of idea that Assassin's Creed Infinity will be sort of like a platform in and of itself. We just off air there, we're trying to get our heads around what precisely that might mean and how all this might function. And I think, well, you mentioned Destiny, I think that's probably is quite a good shout in terms of like, there's this kind of base game potentially that, and I think we all essentially think what will happen is that you load into the Animus within this game and you can then go and play other time zones. And what Jason Schreier is essentially reporting here is that 2 of these games, and they are being referred to as games, main games, which I think is quite interesting in itself. 2 of these are going to be announced. One called Red, which is going to be set in feudal Japan at long last, the Assassin's Creed game that has probably been the most clamoured for.
The most, yeah.
And also one codenamed Neo/Hex, which will be set at the sort of tail end of the Holy Roman Empire and will be sort of focused on the witch trials in Europe, which to me is a really fascinating time to set a game.
Great
quite
choice
quite unusual. Yeah.
I have to admit, Assassin's Creed, for its many, 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 many flaws, they've always been good at picking like eras to explore.
There's kind of two places to start there, I guess. Then, yeah. So we have both fallen away from Assassin's Creed really since before the RPG shift.
Well, before it got really, really big. I mean, the Ezio trilogy was the time that we were interested in it and enjoying it, and the last time Assassin's Creed was interesting, as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, I think when it got really, really heavy RPG, when they sort of tried to reset themselves a little bit with Origins, right?
Yeah, that's
that was
right.
when they sort of tried to really sort of shift in that direction a little bit. Yeah, I think we were both sort of like, oh, that's a cool direction for it to go. It's probably better direction than it had been going, but it never really grabbed us. I think it's fair to say,
I mean, yeah, we both played a bit of Origins. I played a bit of Odyssey. Still kind of meant to see Valhalla at some point, but I think that's, for me, the bloat of the old games was the biggest issue. It became really unfun to play them, and then those RPG games maybe replaced a lot of that with like better content, but it was still just so fucking enormous that I just didn't really want to get too invested in it.
Yeah, it's daunting. Having played a lot of RPGs this year, it's a daunting thing to get involved with.
I mean, at this point, do you think there's anything Ubisoft could do really to pull you back towards Assassin's Creed? Does any of this like headline news that we've been talking about there, does any of this do much for you?
Honestly, yeah, like I think that I could be drawn back into Assassin's Creed because I think Assassin's Creed is fundamentally fucking cool. Like I think it's a good concept for a game, and I think if they are going back to the roots and it is more stealth focused and less RPG focused and map bloat and all that stuff, and it is a smaller project. You were saying to me off air that this is basically spun out from Valhalla DLC. That to me sounds like a better size of game for me personally. Do you know what I mean? Like if it is just going to be the size of one of those old games, do you know what I mean? Which weren't short games, but they weren't 95 hours either. Do you know what I mean? I would be semi-interested in that, I've got to say. I mean, they would have to do a lot of winning me back, I'm not going to lie, but I could easily be talked into the Assassin's Creed franchise again, to be completely honest with you. But what they were doing with the last time with Valhalla was doing nothing for me, if I'm completely honest. I thought the previous ones, Origins and Odyssey, were much more interesting. But yeah, that one particularly wasn't doing anything for me, and I just sort of bounced off that quite hard again. So it's interesting that they're now reinventing it for the third time in what feels like not that long. So yeah.
The word reinventing is quite interesting here, I think, because you've got this, with Mirage, you've got this kind of step backwards towards what they used to be doing, and that is the one that most intrigues me because I really like the original Assassin's Creed game. It does get a bit of stick these days, and actually there's big rumours that an Assassin's Creed 1 remake is going to also come out of all of this based on the work that they've done for Mirage, maybe even reusing some of the same assets, but maybe packaged into Infinity, which is a whole other thing to get your heads around to where these games might actually exist, or maybe Mirage will be part of Infinity, we don't know. But the idea of going back to something that's smaller and simpler, and I actually think like Assassin's Creed as essentially like a Hitman game could still work really well. Just put massive big sandbox environments for you to go and kind of plan out multiple assassinations, and I think that could be really fun to do, and getting away from the kind of base building and sort of clan management and all that kind of stuff that Valhalla certainly seem to be moving towards. But that does leave us with this RPG thing, right? And it does seem to me like these Infinity games are probably going to continue the RPG line. Is there anything about this idea of like an Assassin's Creed platform that interests you? I mean, Assassin's Creed Destiny, something about that kind of works in my head, but what do you think?
I don't think that it doesn't work. Does it interest me? Absolutely not. Could it work though? I think it's a very interesting idea. It's probably one of the more interesting ideas Ubisoft have come up with in the past 10 years, to be completely honest. Because it does work within that world that they've already established as well. Do you know what I mean? They would have multiple animuses. You could go into lots of them. You could be in completely different places, be completely different characters. Do you know what I mean? All that works within their world completely fine. I would love it if it was what you just described and it was more like a Hitman thing. I don't think it is going to be like that, unfortunately. But if it were along those lines, I would be more intrigued to try it, and it might be something that you could dip in and out of as new content is released and whatever. But if it's going to be like a Destiny level time commitment, got to be on it, got to be grinding, got to have the gear, got to have this, got to have that, which I strongly suspect it will be. I also and I dare not say it in case I summon it into existence, that NFTs might be heavily involved in this as well.
Yeah, it could be.
I would have zero interest in any of that whatsoever.
I mean, certainly not if it went to that extent. I mean, this is a central tension for me. Like, there's part of me deep down that still wants to like Assassin's Creed, because I did really like those old games.
I'm exactly the same, man. Like, I have such fond memories of those early games. I remember when the first game came out, which, playing it now, I can understand why it was basically a tech demo for the Ezio trilogy, right? But when that came out, ladies and gentlemen, and for people who are too young to know, that was revolutionary. Like, see, running about in that sort of free style and just being able to sort of run up the side of buildings and stuff like that was amazing for the time. Absolutely amazing. And it was so funny to play. And never has a game went from being so fun and so free to play to feeling so bogged down and restricted and heavy as you go around the world, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this has always been Ubisoft's problem, is that they try and stuff too many ideas, and they're not good at just doing one thing really well. They want to kind of cover all the bases, and, you know, that's gone on to such an extent now that it's become a meme. Like, when we saw reactions to Elden Ring coming out and people saying, oh, if Ubisoft made this game, it would look like this, and it was like completely over the top with markers and checkpoints and all that kind of thing. Yeah. And so there's something here to me that's like, there's a core tension in this idea of the platform, which is that on one side, it could be fascinating to just have a lot of, hopefully, kind of smaller, self-contained games, essentially, like this one set in the Witch Trials, to jump out of that and jump into a feudal Japan game that might feel quite different in sort of tone and mood and all that, but is part of the same story. Like, they could do some really cool experimental things story-wise, and they could also do some really unusual temporal settings for the series, because they've kind of ran out of ground a wee bit, I think, now, in terms of going like, here are the big epochs in human history that the broad spectrum of people are going to kind of know about or be invested in. So now they can kind of dive into these smaller areas, right? But the other side of this tension to me is like, this is just annualization, like by another format. Instead of releasing one big game every October, they now just kind of put it out onto this platform every 6 months or whatever, you know?
But isn't that Destiny? Isn't that just the Destiny model?
Yeah, I suppose it is, but like, Destiny has kind of, over a decade or more, has kind of perfected that, or at least improved it or whatever, and it's still not going to be for everyone. But it's like, Assassin's Creed felt like they were trying to, or they spoke as if they were about to move away from doing that. Like, they took the break before Origins. They've taken a bit more time over all these games. They've even
they have. They've been every 2 years, and it's been Far Cry, Assassin's Creed Assassin's Creed for a while now. But clearly, that's not. It's not making the
juice.
Spreadsheets look as good.
And that's what really worries me, is that it could just end up sort of stifling the potential for creativity that it contains in itself. Whereas if they just kind of go, oh shit, we need to just pump out content all the time, and we've just got this kind of one set of mechanics. You know, you won't release a new game, so you won't necessarily improve any of that or change any of it or radically overhaul it, you know?
So do you think Mirage is the last mainline Assassin's Creed game if we are also getting Infinity at the same time?
I mean, I think it might be the last standalone thing for a while. I'm not convinced that it's necessarily going to feel like, I don't think that we'll look back and go, Origins, Odyssey, Valhalla, Mirage are part of one thing. I think we'll look at that trilogy as being part of one thing, and then Mirage maybe kind of being its own thing away off here.
It's like the stepping stone to Infinity, perhaps.
Yeah, potentially. I mean, it could end up being like the first content block of Infinity, because it hasn't been made clear whether this is separate or not. I've been taking it to be that this can't be part of Infinity because it is more like stealth action, and my assumption, could be totally off base, is that the platform, this Infinity thing, will follow the RPG line, because that feels like that's what they want to do with Assassin's Creed these days, you know?
It's also just more applicable to that sort of thing as well, you know?
Closer to a big like MMORPG type thing anyway, right? Like loads of people online all the time, you know, your ability to build this one character over the fucking 8 years that you play the game or whatever, like that all has much more RPG tendencies. So I think Mirage might be a kind of lone standalone thing, may just be a content pack within Infinity. Don't really know, but I really hope that if that is what I'm hoping it could be, like a bit of a return to form on the stealth action front, that they would be like, okay, we'll put one of those out every 2 or 3 years as well, and you know, we might farm this around some of the smaller Ubisoft studios or whatever. That's kind of where I think it could go, or yeah, I just there's an element of this that I think could be really exciting in terms of like the narrative design and the worlds that they want to explore, but I just worry about Ubisoft, because they've just, God, it's been so long since we've been excited about anything Ubisoft has done, and it's been so long since the headlines of Ubisoft haven't been fucking dreadful.
Yeah, I mean, you're totally right. I think that it would be very interesting if they done this right. Because it is Ubisoft, I have very little faith that they will. But I don't think that what you're suggesting is in any way a bad idea for this franchise specifically. And as I said, like in the world of Assassin's Creed, this works. You know what I mean? This fundamentally works. And if they do it right, it could be really cool. I personally think that this probably is an end to the mainline games if it is very successful. If it's not, they might dabble in a few remakes, for example, keep it that ticking along, and then if it's really, really struggling after like a couple of years, then we might get back into the mainline games. But I think that this, after Mirage, when Infinity comes out, there will be a hard pause on the mainline games for, I would say, at least 2 years to see how it's going. Maybe with a remake of the original game in there or something like that, do you know what I mean? But yeah, it'll be very interesting to see how this pans out, Lewis. Very interesting indeed. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I think we'll have to call it a day there. I'd like to remind everyone that you can find PlayersToo on all the social media. That is Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, the lot. You can also find our written content over at PlayersToo.com. That's PlayersToo.com. And if you could take 5 seconds to give us 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts or whatever you get your podcasts, that really, really, really helps us out. It is a huge amount for the exposure of the show. And while you're over there, if you could leave us a little review as well, again, that just helps us out even more. And thank you so much to anyone that's already done that for us. You're an absolute legend to us. I'd like to remind everyone that our play-along game for this month is Inscryption. I've now got it downloaded, Lewis, on the Steam Deck, but I have yet to play it.
Yeah, I haven't really played any more of it since a few weeks ago when I kind of put a good chunk of hours into it. But yeah, really looking forward to getting stuck in properly. It would be good to play it alongside you because I guess I was kind of noodling off on my own playing it before, but it would be nice to get a wee weekly update whenever you get around to starting it.
Yeah. No, it'll be very interesting to play this. Like, I'm very excited to play it. I've genuinely been looking forward to playing this for a while. So, yes, want to get started very, very soon. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we will see you next week.
Thanks.